Hey, it's Robert Phoenix here, and we are live for the Friday Forecast, and we're going to have a great show today, talking about some really controversial subject matter. The subject itself is AI, but the controversial part is leadership in the realm of AI, in the world of AI. How does leadership evolve alongside of this tool that, whether you like it or not, is inevitable? It is here. The toothpaste is not going back in the tube. So there are people asking questions about what it means and how we interface with it. And moving forward, how do we maintain a role of leadership when the technology can process faster and forecast further than most humans can? These are really, really big questions. And our guest today, Matthew Jensen, has written a book about it. And I don't know if Matthew has all of the answers. He's got a few, but what he's really doing is he's asking some very important questions. So put aside your judgment around AI for a moment, right? That it's going to be this thing that's going to take over the world and it's going to absolutely crush humanity. There could be a scenario, there could be a timeline where that happens, but there could also be another scenario where there are people who are working with it in ways that provide elegant solutions and can really resolve the technological bottleneck that seems to have accrued with what we call the elite or the technocrats who have crowded into the space and are dominating the space. Are they the only ones that are allowed to be there? Are there other people who will evolve and have a different relationship with AI who can bring something else to the table and give the technocrats some competition, something that they have to deal with? Because that's the nature of humanity. We're by and large disruptive. We like to build a better widget. In spite of what Donald Trump thinks, Americans have always been at the forefront of innovation and trying to figure out how to do something better, more efficient, and solutions that are outside the box. So we're going to approach today's talk in that spirit, and I hope more people show up because it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation, and not one a lot of people are having right now. Like there's either just vapidly pro AI and you'll get the cheerleaders from the digital sideline. And then you'll get the Luddites who want absolutely nothing to do with it and, don't want to have any kind of skin to skin or non skin to skin contact. Right. But there's nothing really measured and balanced about the conversation that's going on right now around it. So Matthew has joined us, but before we bring him on, we need to give a little bit of a shout out here to our guy Chris at True Science. As you know, as the government has decided to open back up, one of the stipulations is that they're going to remove THC from all hemp products. And I think there's about a year grace period. And I was texting with Chris the other day, and he just sounded so down because they had just gone through this at a state level with SB1 in Texas. And, I'm wondering if one of the reasons why Greg Abbott decided to punt on SB1 is that he knew that on a federal level that it was going to be banned. And by allowing the federal government to put a fork in THC, and small amounts of it, by the way, in CBD products, that Greg didn't have to fall on the sword, right? That the federal government can fall on the sword. So looking back on his decision not to back SB1 looks a little calculated, if you ask me. All that aside, CBD is one of the best products that you can take to keep your body, mind, and spirit online. And True Science is one of the best companies out there that crafts completely organically sourced CBD You can get the gummies, you can get the tinctures, you can get the salves. And right now at truemscience.com, there's a big discount for first-time buyers. Not only that, if you put 15MINS into your checkout, you're going to get the goodie bag as well. So there's never been a better time to dive into CBD and begin to experience some of the benefits from it, whether it's sleep or pain or for your pet. A number of people out there have used pet sounds for their pets and really calms them down, chills them out, especially when they're going through some physical trauma. So this is your opportunity to go in and get it at a really nice discount, plus get the goodies on top of it. And, you know, these guys are going to need a war chest if they can mount some kind of a suit against the federal government. They're going to have to go to the Supreme Court in order to get this thing reversed. So I could see all these CBD growers, the hemp growers, the processors, the manufacturers, the distributors. You know, I would say, just off the top of my head, there are at least 50,000 jobs, if not more, associated with CBD in the country. Like in this town alone, there's at least, I don't know, 8 or 9 shops that sell CBD products. Now they sell other things as well, like vapes or kratom, or there's quite a few of them. This must say something about the place that I live in. But if that happens, that's going to crater a large part of their business. So they'll have to resort to tobacco, and kratom is a whole different beast. They're trying to go after kratom. But kratom is, they have to have a whole new bill, and there's a whole mechanism with kratom. But it all comes down to big pharma, big alcohol, and the Mexican cartels, because even in states like California, CBD outsells THC products. Imagine that. So, you know, we want to stand up for things that allow us to have personal, medical, pharmacological choice outside of big pharma or big alcohol or the cartels. So by purchasing the product, you're improving your life and you're helping ultimately contribute to a war chest where these people are going to have to do this one more time and fight for their right to sell hemp and the hemp related products that are CBD. Okay. Why don't we bring Matthew onto the stage here, and let's welcome him. Give a warm Chattaria welcome for Mr. Matthew Jensen. Hey, Matthew.
How's it going? Long time no see.
It's going great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just enjoying coffee. I've got the Taylor Swift Let's Fucking Go.
All right. Good. For all you Swifties out there, raise your mug. So just a full disclosure, Matthew is a client of mine. Also, full disclosure, he's not paying to be on the show. So he's here because I think he's got some really interesting subject matter that needs to be addressed. And I love the fact that you took the initiative to write a book about a very controversial topic and subject, and something that you run up against every single day in your what we call your straight gig, your 9-to-5 gig, but something that you've thought about for a very long time in your private life. Why don't we start there? Let's start with a little bit about who you are, where you come from, because I know your backstory, but a lot of people don't. And we'll start there, and then we'll move into your ideas around how and why you wanted to write this book.
Yeah, so I basically grew up in a 4th generation family business. It was a boatyard and marine industry. So I feel like even though I grew up in kind of more of a yuppie community, I had the blue collar background that I was exposed to every single day, and also actually got out there and built things. So over the years, I basically translated that interest in building to computers, and it was something that I could do it at home on nights and on weekends, learning stuff. Really transitioned that into a career. I'd say a lot of my career has been around data and consulting, and helping people solve problems with technology and information. So that's really been my trajectory. About almost 20 years ago, in school, I first started writing about artificial intelligence. When I originally read the Turing test paper back in the day, it really got my head thinking about a world where, in my interests at the time, that we would have bots constantly interacting with financial markets, and how it would totally change the trajectory of trading and finance, and eventually spread out from there, and kind of, I'd say, in many ways, change the life as we know it on a day-to-day basis.
So you grew up in Seattle or around Seattle, and I never asked you this question. How much of being in close proximity with Microsoft forged your identity with computers and software?
Well, I think it was pretty interesting because overnight, a lot of my friends' parents got extremely wealthy when Microsoft and the affiliated companies basically went public, and all the stuff around that. But at the same time, too, is when that happens, there's kind of a spillover effect to different parts of your local economy, whether that be foundations and community sort of development things, but also the investment cycle into local VCs and companies. So, I feel like grew up in that cultural atmosphere where there was a lot of people that had made it, but were looking for their creative next gig all the time. So it was a great childhood, and especially growing up the boat company, there was a lot of people that just came down there and hung out that were, I'd say, in the technical sphere, or as investors and stuff. So, as a kid growing up, I always was privy, as the kid that was interested in asking a lot of questions, to a lot of the discussions of where people that were putting their dollars behind technological development thought, what the future looked like for them.
Right. So you had an inquisitive mind, and you were just in that place where everybody seemed to be immersed in it. Because I was living in Seattle in 1989, 1990, and watching some of these guys, one of whom I became a friend with, and this other guy who worked with him. They both worked at Microsoft, and they were making just incredible money and doing really well. One of the guys went out and bought a building.
Yeah.
Right. And they were both younger than I was. And I'm like, wow, what the hell is going on here? I mean, there's a gold rush. I probably should have said, I got to figure out a way to get into Microsoft at that time. My life would have been a lot different. So that's really cool that you were immersed in that. You told me this story yesterday, and I'm going to try to see if we can find a way to relate it to AI. And the story was, you started to work in your father's boat business. And one of the guys there, one of the old salts, said to you, go build me a box, right? Build me a box. And that was one of your first sort of engineering, construction projects. So talk a little bit about what that was like, what went through your head, how was your box received, and how does that relate to where we are with AI?
Yeah, interesting question. So years ago, I've been a member of Toastmasters, the public speaking club, for years, and gave a speech on how building this box related to my career now and the trajectory of my life. But it was really as the fourth generation of this family business that was built in many ways, part of the business on trade skills, they wanted me to have some understanding of what we did. as a business and be able to do it myself. So yeah, it was kind of like this challenge to go build something simple from start to finish and learn how to essentially structure that whole process and deliver on it. So, it was finding the right wood, basically the right materials and tools, planning out your process, measuring twice, cutting once, structuring it together, and then building the finishing work. So, in terms of like a digital product, this would be, understanding the tools and your idea of what you're going after, actually scoping out the idea and developing basically a workflow plan for it and a project plan, and then starting to build it, and then figuring out whoever your end customer is, how they're going to use it and interface with it. So, and then also the constant, I guess, reiteration for it. So this is a box that I built when I was, I don't know, 10, 11 years old. And looking back, it was probably a little sketchy that they were having me go out and use all these power tools in the way I was, but it worked out. And it was something that I continued to sand and varnish and basically repair every couple of years until the end of college. So it was almost kind of it was a learning lesson, but something that built skills that carried on throughout my entire life.
It feels very Jungian in a lot of ways, right? Like it's become this symbol in your life. It's more than just a project you worked on when you were 10. It's this reminder of something that shaped who you are in a lot of ways. And by continuing to maintain the relationship with that box, you're maintaining the relationship with you personally. That's a fascinating story. And I just think if somebody asked me to build a box, I probably would have said to my father, "Hey, can you build a box for me?" I need a box done, right? And I think your methodology is probably way better, way better. So let's use that as a metaphor for AI. AI is this thing now that is just such a kind of a dark archetype in a lot of ways for a lot of people. That it is this black hole that's consuming the future and quite honestly a lot of the present as well. And let's treat it as a box. How do we build a better box with AI?
Well, I think it's really, I'd say, level the playing field in a lot of ways. So I was thinking earlier this morning about building websites, and originally you had building a website was a big deal. Either you knew how to build a website where you were spending a couple $100,000 on building a website. And then tools like WordPress and Squarespace and stuff like that came out where it really built a lot of the back end and had that standardized. So then you had a lot of these, I'd say, traditional roles filled by website builders that were way more technical. They became more designers and structuring of the process and how it would visually interface with your customers.
Right.
Well, now you have tools that are essentially chatbots where you can ask the computer and communicate with the computer and tell them to basically build stuff for you. So it's really, I'd say, kind of an evolution in many ways. One that we've seen throughout history, especially in technology. It wasn't really that long ago in the big scheme of the world that we were, as humans, still using stone tools.
Right. Yeah.
And there's all these basically level set moments where a new technological mechanism comes out, for instance, a steam engine, and you really have this transition period where a lot of people still operate in the way they were doing in the past. And then you have these other people that are like, well, this is the future. We see the value. And how do we find a way to build this into our way of doing things, even though I guess that creative transition might be a little difficult.
Right. Yeah, I think initially there's going to be some rough waters because I don't know if you caught my forward a little bit of my intro, but one of the things that I talked about is that if we can steward the technology and in your parlance have leadership models within the technology, it has the possibility of leveling the playing field against the technocrats who want to use the technology as kind of a cul-de-sac, closed circuit, not open source, even though Sam Altman named his company OpenAI. There is some open component to it, but at the end of the day, they want to own we'll call it the terrain, which is what we're going to get into and what you've defined this as. So I think it's incumbent upon people who are innovative, who are mavericks, and who do want to have a more level playing field with something that's inevitable, to figure out how you can work with this thing, co-create it. And I know that you've done this primarily for a corporate setting, so that inside of a corporation, leadership is not left behind and the cart is not leading the horse. But I also feel like there's a trickle down effect to where everyday people can take some of this information, and if they have a technological background and they are interested in it, they can apply some of these ideas. Why don't we start with this core idea that it's the new terrain? AI is a terrain and not a tool. Can you expand upon that for people?
Well, I think it's really a landscape. So in the book, we talked about the art of war and controlling the landscape that you're operating in. If you're going to build essentially a business model and a business structure that AI is expected to be embedded in every part of the business, that's really a strategic decision that defines who you are, both as a business, but your culture around it too. And for, I think, artificial intelligence to be exceptionally integrated in a way that it provides value both for you and your customers and the employees in the business, there has to be a clear strategy of how this is going to fit in. Otherwise, you just have total nonsense. What we see many times is that, the traditional way of, I guess, corporate leadership for many people is you hear a buzzword, you say it on your earnings call, and then you go out and you're like, I need this, whatever, it doesn't matter, but we just need to have AI in our business. Without, a lot of the, I guess, legwork that needs to be incorporated to have your, essentially like having clean data to train your models, some of the fundamental aspects. So, and you're seeing it too with, I'd say, more independent people and small person startups, that if you have an AI forward strategy, you're able to scale quickly and bring the humanness in the areas where you need humanness to add value both to your business and your customers.
Yeah, I mean, I dabble in the creation of images for the website for the broadcasts, the thumbnails, and even today's background, on my green screen, that's an AI image, and I program that. Now, and I do have some graphic skills. I didn't go to school for graphic design, but I used to play around with Photoshop when you could actually own it, and I was okay. I was self-taught, and I could do a few things. But for me to do something like this in Photoshop would have taken me, I don't know, half a day maybe, right? And then and the cool thing is like, I just typed in a few things of what I wanted, and it gave me some examples, which I rejected. And I finally got to one where it's like, oh, I like this. And a lot of it had to do with being really precise with the language and figuring out how the AI client was interpreting what I was saying. And then it popped up. I thought, I like this. I like the color scheme. I like where Friday Farcast sits. It's perfect. So I downloaded it, and it's part of the show. And that took me about 5 minutes before we went live. Right. And that just gives people an idea of the scale of how quickly these things can take place. And again, it's not that I don't have a skill set, right? I have a skill set, but it's a skill set that it would take me much longer to produce something. Now, in case of something like writing, I'm loath to have AI do any writing for me, but I can see where for some people, if that is not a strong suit, let's say they're much better with math and figures and accounting, that AI could provide the same kind of tools that it provides me with creating imagery, and can help them get to shortcuts with what they're saying. So I think that the scale of it is a really interesting sort of social technological proposition that we're dealing with. For me, the scale that I am interfacing with AI works, and I'm not really interested in doing anything more than it right now. Would I want to do a 30-second clip for an intro? Maybe. I don't know. Right. I may want to pull a clip of video somewhere and mess around with it myself. I certainly would rather go into GarageBand and create my own music versus AI doing it, because those are certain things that I feel a creative pull to, and I don't want to outsource it. Right. So the scale part, I think, is really, really important. But let's bring this back to a corporate level. And there's some bullet points here that you bring up that are part of this summary that you sent me. And it's about leadership in the AI world. And I think the first bullet point is fascinating. What do leaders actually bring when machines can analyze faster and forecast better? Where do you go with that?
Well, I think a lot of people would maybe say that their manager might be better if it was just AI, right? So if you have specialty and you're
is that a conversation you have in corporate?
I mean, we have had like conversations like this before.
I don't mean to like get you in hot water, but around the water cooler, right? People are like, if we had AI, we would have been able to sidestep this mess here, because it would have been way more logical and more functional. I can see those conversations happening. So what are humans bringing to the table?
Well, it's different, right? Like I think to effectively use AI, you need to ask right questions,
right,
and have a good understanding whether or not the AI is gaslighting you, and talk in terms of conversational bots. A good idea what the data that's training it comes from, and also the ability to discern it. But at the same side, you still have this from the interaction with humans too. So, like, for instance, if you had a corporate executive that maybe CEO or something, that had a like co-pilot that was basically programmed to think like them, that they could interact with and ask questions back and forth. There might be a lot of situations where that actually might give you better feedback on the state of the business and the strategic landscape to go through. We've seen it throughout history where you have a bunch of yes men, yes women around that respect the hierarchy and are just telling executives what they want to hear. And all of a sudden you find out that there's been this large accounting fraud or something like that, or you're strategically blind. So it's, I think it's important to have actual knowledge, but you don't necessarily need the technical skills in the same way that you used to in the past. I think going forward, having that balance of kind of emotional intelligence as well as digital fluency, understanding how the system works and how to navigate it, is going to be more and more important. And this book really was, I think, written more with it being relevant 5 years out than it was today, even though it is very relevant today.
Another question you ask is how does leadership keep their judgment from being drowned out by the screen? I mean, I could totally see that, where if the screen is constantly coming up with something better or something that the manager or the director didn't see or figure out, they could lose confidence in their own judgment. How does an individual stay in touch with that without feeling like, what am I doing here?
Yeah. Well, if you've ever had a mother that knows better than you, right? You've built up this discernment ability. It's like I think ultimately you're responsible for the decisions. So that it may be true that they have advice and you've gotten the best feedback, but that's not always going to be the right decision. So if you have I'd say subject matter expertise, your industry well, your customers, your clients, you have a real, I'd say, educational or emotionally tied gut instinct on stuff. There are going to be a lot of situations where the right decision is not the right decision. I think basically the human brain is still the superior machine any way that we look at it. But AI is basically giving you the most likely decision or the most likely answer based off of what it generated last, right? So it's a paper trail, but it's not always correct.
And things can change from the last situation or the last rendering of whatever kind of judgment or direction AI is spewing out. And so you have to take into account that things are changing. They're changing by the moment. I could see a situation where in a corporate setting, leadership could use AI as a scapegoat as well.
Totally agree.
Like, well, this is what the AI said to do. It's not my fault, right? You guys invested in this, and you were all gung ho, and we decided to go down this path. And look where it brought us to. Well, that's an abdication of a certain level of responsibility on their end too, wouldn't it be?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of ways I think that I see in the future where it's basically a mechanism of shifting responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. The other point that's brought up here, which I think is a really important one, and it's something that you and I have talked about sort of offline a little bit, is how do they being corporate leadership or people in positions of leadership inside of corporations, build a future that reflects their values, not just technological inevitability. So in order to do that, there has to be, number one, a discussion about values. What are they? What's important? How does that permeate the culture? And then how do we integrate AI into that? I mean, I think that if of anything, that might be the most important question here, because what's the value? Make money, economize, be efficient, cut out as many humans as possible. Well, if that's the value of the company, you're still going to need humans for some degree of interface. Like, I'm not going to buy a product from an AI. You're going to need a sales team and a sales force. And even though AI is supposed to handle a lot of complex customer service, I still think it's lagging behind real customer service and people that are invested in what they're doing. So it's not like you can just cut everything out. You have to have some human element. So the values just can't be bottom line. Well, how does that change or shape and mold values moving forward? And what do they look like?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think at the root of it too, if you're talking about corporate business, it is true that they have a responsibility to their shareholders over everything.
Right.
So there's a lot of these value programs, their vision, purpose that are generated by marketing. And some companies, you do see that these are successfully implemented throughout the business. But more often than not, I would say that they're almost lip service. And whenever you have a crisis or anything like that, it's out the window immediately. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're basically talking about math as baseline, and you can program whatever you want in there. I know for at least the chatbots that I use, I've programmed them with different aspects of my life, goals, dreams, personal history, and I'm able to have a feedback conversation with something that at least has a basis of who I believe I am as a person and where I want to go in my life as a foundational element. So it's just it's a very difficult question to answer, right? And at any time too, things might go off the rails. So as we've seen, but yeah, it's a difficult question, but I think a very important one, and core to any sort of AI strategy that you have is who are we and how do we want this to look in our interaction with society,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that has been a real buzz topic, in corporate culture over the last 10 years is this whole idea of inclusivity, right? We're going to have an inclusive and diverse culture in our workplace. And that means that you could have people that are so-called BIPOCs. You could have people that have interesting gender identity and pronoun sort of values. You could have people from other cultures and other countries. And there's even some fiduciary reward for companies staffing in that regard. Like, BlackRock looks kindly upon companies like that. Your loans are going to be at a lower interest rate if you hit these diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of numbers. And it's gotten a little bit out of hand. I think a lot of people have seen that just because it's supposed to be something that they're invested in doesn't always turn out right. Like, look at Bud Light or Cracker Barrel. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion, and we bring AI into the discussion, that's a whole different ball game. That's a whole different discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Has those kinds of ethical debates come up about AI in the workspace?
Yeah, totally. If you really look back to a couple years ago when we first saw some of these public chatbots go live, and then even this year with Grok, you have something that's trained off of basically an entire universe of something, and then someone will go back in the background and code what they want too. So if you're talking, I mean, even from something I'd say a little bit unrelated, but from a historical sense, you have these tools that are basically building a new memory on this is who we are. This is our shared history together. These are how you interpret historical events. And throughout history, right, we've seen, history goes to the victor, so to speak.
Right, exactly.
And in many ways that's what we're seeing right now too. So you do have, I'd say in many ways you have a lot of these chatbots that were originally built off of a data set that include, online troll culture for a lot of things, among other stuff. And also you have, behind the scenes, built-in ways of this is how you need to view the world based on where we are and where we go. So, like we talked earlier with the whole value thing, it's whether it be AI churning through data or AI being utilized as a chatbot to converse with you, everything's really been built through a frame of reference that who's ever programming these want it to view through. And that's, infinitely scalable for the most part. So it's a pretty interesting, it's going to be an interesting thing over the next 5 to 10 years to see how culture changes based on this, and how people's interactions with the world and how they're reflected in society change based off of these tools that they're interacting on their own, when nobody's watching, essentially.
Yeah. The future is here, but it's still to be written, and it's being written fairly quickly as we speak. Literally, there are modifications and tweaks and variations of models and sets going on right now as we talk. But this idea, you bring this up in one of the talking points that was brought up in the summary, which gets back to this idea of how do you deal with AI and the bots in the culture, which is employees must see AI as augmentation, not a threat to their dignity and relevance. And I think that's going to be a real challenge, I have to say.
Yeah, definitely.
Because most people are going to feel really insecure. So back in the old days, if you wanted to be relevant in a company, you would say, if I learned Python or C++, I'm more valuable, right? And let's say that's not your area of expertise. Let's say your area of expertise is operations and not engineering, but you learn those on the side. And then all of a sudden something comes up and you go, I can solve that problem because Python, C++. Those sorts of things are not going to be as relevant moving forward because there's going to be machines that know how to do those things. So where do humans fit in a corporation where it's like, how do I stay relevant? What skills do I need to learn? And what is it going to take for me to basically keep my job as this new technology winds up doing more and more and more of the human-oriented skills. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think it's very true. So I remember when my dad was an engineer by trade, and it really shifted, from working on blueprints and stuff like that to you need to know Excel, you need to be really good at typing and all this stuff. So you need to have the knowledge, but also have, I guess, more technical skills. I kind of feel that in many ways we're moving more into this digital fluency era where it's more art and less science and ability to use the tools, but also having that background knowledge to know whether or not the tools are showing you BS, right?
Right.
Yeah. So kind of in the manner that you discussed earlier of generating the thumbnail for this.
The image. Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of have a vision of what you want and a vision of how things should be deployed in a business. And you're using something as a tool to try to get you there. And it's not a hard, fast thing where I'm going to type this function in and this delivers this out. It's more of a feedback conversational process.
Yeah, totally. Because it was like the fourth example of what I wanted, and I had to figure out why it was creating things that I didn't want inside the image. And once I figured that out, it started to work with me in a more efficient and elegant way. It's like, oh, okay, we I learned what you needed to know, and you learned what I wanted, and so here we go. This is one of the examples of that. You speaking of examples, you bring up Tesla and Ping On and Unilever as companies that have adapted AI and have some leadership baked in with AI. Do you have any examples of that? And what are they doing that other companies aren't doing or could be doing?
Well, I think, there's a lot of criticism with Tesla's self-driving, self-driving quote, right?
Right.
But they've still made it a core part of their business for years. And with that, they're also deploying it and having all this data that's generated that they can basically feed back in the system and improve it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, as I was seeing, I saw something about, I think it was Waymo killed a cat in San Francisco a couple days ago. It was like a beloved
Waymo,
right?
Waymo kills some people in test runs in Arizona.
Yeah. So it's I think there's so much fear about this, and it is warranted, right?
Yeah.
But with everything throughout society where we see, I guess, a technological improvement, there's going to be mishaps along the way. So
that's true.
I mean, with Tesla, you've seen that a lot too. A lot of issues. I used to have a like self-driving Volvo, so to speak, and it would glitch out sometimes and try to run me off the road. Right.
Yeah.
So had to get my LiDAR cameras on that changed 3 times while I owned it. It's I think it's important, even if you don't have it necessarily deployed in your business, to have it deployed concurrently where the business environment is going, so that you can build those simulations and those feedback loops over time, and build some sort of foundational knowledge in it too.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very uncomfortable reality, frankly. Both how it's going to disrupt society, but also I'd say um, the lack of humanity that a lot of these executives have around it just be purely, well, we can do this. Doesn't even matter if it necessarily works, but it justifies us laying off 10% of our workforce overnight. So it just is, I mean, it's difficult. Like, I think it's for many legacy companies that are struggling, it's a way to boost their stock price. And then there's a lot of these like core leaders that are more focused on building it innately as part of their business to help deliver kind of this augmented value, both for their employees, but also the quality of their products.
Mm-hmm. Right. What would you tell somebody right now who is in a state of fear over losing their job to some function of artificial intelligence? What would you tell them?
I think it's important to understand where the economy is going around this, and start testing out and building the skills associated with it. It's, automation, even before we've really determined it as AI, has been displacing jobs for 30, 40 years now.
Yeah.
So it's just it just seems like it's more of a cultural group effort, so to speak, to really accelerate it real fast. And it's I don't know, it's in the same way, if you thought that you were going to lose your job for other reasons, maybe you got acquired by a company and they have someone in your same role at the other job, like, we just have to be honest with themselves. And to say that I wasn't feeling the same thing about this would be a lie too.
Right.
Someone that's very technical in many aspects, also has like the leadership stuff. I'm just, definitely have thought, where does my world fit within this technological landscape going forward?
Which is one of the reasons why you wrote the book.
Yeah.
Right. It's part of your own self-exploration as well as the cultural ramifications.
Yeah.
Somebody was lamenting today that the tech companies and the AI stocks were taking a dump today. Do you have any insight into why there's been a dip?
I don't know. I think it comes and goes. There's a lot of conversation about how we're in a big bubble. And I think there's a lot of legitimacy to that. Right. Mm-hmm. So you have OpenAI. I don't know their exact revenue figures, but I think they're still under 2 billion, but they're $1 trillion company. If you look at historical, historically how we valued companies, at some point you actually have to earn your keep and justify your valuation. And it's been very frothy, so to speak.
Right.
And then you have, I think something that you and I talked about one time too, is you have a lot of these AI companies basically saying that they're going to invest in other AI companies. And it's kind of like a behind the wall handshake to basically boost each other's stock prices.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't think that there's necessarily a fully baked business model that justifies the valuations that we see for artificial intelligence.
Right. It's all
right now.
Yeah. It's all kind of where the internet stocks were before Greenspan started to raise the prime, and they couldn't get their third round of funding with a reasonable interest rate. So the other thing you and I talked about is that we are really in this, and I'm not sure people understand just how important the time we're living in is right now. Like, this is when Alvin Toffler, the futurist, wrote the book Future Shock. He was really talking about the time that we're in now, where things like self-driving cars that could displace and are displacing, Uber drivers, who were a disruptive technology, right? Because they disrupted the normal taxi industry.
Yeah.
And so you have now another disruptive force. And I think it's interesting in that California's response to Waymo is that Uber drivers are now unionizing, right? And it's like, now you're going to be taxi cab drivers, essentially, right? So it's forcing them to sort of rally the troops, right? Like, if we're all together in this, then we have a better chance of, either surviving together or dying together, right? So it's already having these ramifications on certain parts of our society that have been disruptive already. But one of the things that you and I were talking about is beyond this future shock, because I think that we're there now, and we're seeing the effects of, what Toffler talked about, he and his wife talked about. But the other side of this is sort of the George Jetson version of the future, where, people are driving flying cars, and you have machines that generate food, and everything is just so much easier because technology has eliminated a lot of the hard work involved in living in everyday life. I remember as a kid going to the 1964 World's Fair in New York City, and it was all about the future. And you had companies like GE and DuPont and GM. And it was like, hey, you're going to talk on a phone where there's a screen, and you're going to have a car that can float in water and drive in water. And there's going to be these really cool monorails, and we're going to live on the moon, and, we're going to have apartments underwater. I mean, that was the whole vision of the 1964 World's Fair. And in a lot of ways, we're kind of there, with some of this stuff. And the whole idea based on that World's Fair and based on the George Jetson model is that technology was going to make our lives more elegant and easier. So what I did here is I brought up an image of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because we talked about this yesterday. And in a perfect world, right, we have this sort of one-for-one trade-off of technology and self-actualization, right? So at the bottom of the pyramid, we have the physiological world, right? That's making sure that you have food, a roof over your head, and you have some clothing. Like, that's the baseline of Maslow, right? Bottom line. And for the most part, even though we've seen a degradation in that model over the last 10 years, we have achieved that. Okay. So the next level up is safety. We feel okay in this exact moment. We then also want to feel safe, confident we can avoid pain, hunger, and other dangers for the immediate future. I would say that even with the social stressors, most people still have a relative sense of safety. I mean, let's face it, you're not living in Gaza, right?
Yeah.
So even though you may have to have some situational awareness depending upon which part of town you're in, there's a really good chance that when you return home at night, you're going to be safe. Social, if we all feel safe, then our social needs for love and belonging come into play. We feel secure, we're part of a tribe, and we can trust and unworried about rejection or alienation. We're starting to get a little wobbly here, right? We're 2 levels off of the bottom. And I would say 15 to 20 years ago, that was not a problem, right? There were socially defined roles. And even if the roles were, I would say, diverse, 20 years ago, 2005, we're not really dealing with things like Black Lives Matter. We're not really dealing with, crazy blue-haired Antifas, or, we're kind of in this sort of, melting pot, for better or worse, right? And so socially, I'd say about 20 years ago or 25 years ago, things were better. But now socially, I think there's probably more questions. People, I think, don't always feel safe. Okay, so now we're starting to see a little bit of a break here in the pyramid. And then we get to the next level, which is self-esteem. Once we're secure in our social needs, our primal desires for status and self-esteem come into play. We want to feel not only part of the group, but an admired and respected part. I still think that that's in the air. Some people have it more than others. I would say that you're probably at that level. You're well employed. You bring value to what you do. You have the ability to take care of all those other layers below you so that your kids can feel safe, have a roof over the head. So I would say there's a large segment of society still in the self-esteem layer. We get to self-actualization. And self-actualization is where it gets really interesting. Because when we get to self-actualization, all these other areas of Maslow's hierarchy of needs have been met. And so theoretically, the ultimate role or goal of self-actualization is to live in a world that is a byproduct of one's own will and imagination, right? If I can will it and I can imagine it, I can do it. That would be the ultimate goal of self-actualization. So that means if you have the right tools, if you have the right knowledge, if you have the right skill set, if you have all these other things in your background mastered and part of you, then you can do some really, really interesting stuff. And the whole idea, I think, with technology is that it's supposed to meet us at the top of the pyramid, right? It's supposed to be the tools that we have at our disposal for self-actualization. Like if you go back into the 1990s, okay, in the 1990s, recording in studios really changes. You have Pro Tools, and Pro Tools are, it's like this amazing breakthrough because you don't need to go to a 48-track studio in order to create your own record or record your own band. I mean, you have it all on your Apple computer, and you have the right inputs, and you get a board and you MIDI it up, and all of a sudden that self-actualization becomes, much more instantaneous. Like you don't need a label. You don't need Amit Erdogan or David Geffen. You're like, we can do this right here. Right. And that's in a lot of ways what technology has allowed us to do. Right now, we're using technology to have this conversation. You're in Oklahoma. I'm in Texas. And we're talking about the future of AI. And these tools were not available to us 20 years ago. Right. We would have had to have been part of some major broadcasting company in order to have this conversation. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, technology is kind of there with self-actualization. But when we bring AI into the discussion, which is entirely next level, like just next level stuff, like you don't even need Pro Tools. You can just go into AI. Like I've found these, I don't know if you've found these songs, but people are doing these songs, these parodies with AI, and they're fucking amazing.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Like
Hilarious.
I heard somebody do a disco version of Smells Like Teen Spirit. I'm like, this should be illegal. I mean, it was that good, right? So it eliminates all those tools that we had at our disposal to self-actualize. So we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and it's like in a perfect world, we're kind of all at this place where we have this understanding about who we are, what we're capable of, and what we could do. It's sort of like bubbling and getting really frothy with the fourth dimension, right? And now AI comes along and gives us this opportunity to perhaps self-actualize in ways that we're not even fully aware of yet. But the problem is that it seems to be this cultural void or rift where there are still some people fuck down here, right?
Yeah.
In the physiological and safety oriented world, where you have up here certain groups of people who are self-actualized, and clearly Elon Musk and Sam Altman, Breakaway Society, Larry Ellison, all these people, they're at the top of the pyramid. And these tools allow them to build wealth, and companies faster scale things out in a much shorter period of time. But there's a lag, right? Just like in the early days of the internet, when you would get on like a digital call with somebody, there was latency and lag. How do we address this, Matthew? Because I think it's the biggest issue that is not just a technological one, but it's a spiritual one as well. How do we go about addressing this?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting discussion, and even in that social hierarchy too, we see a lot of stories in the news these days about how people basically create relationships with their AI. Like they program a girlfriend or something like that, and then I read one a couple months ago where the conversation limit capped out, and basically the guy's girlfriend was deleted.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no!
So you have, yeah, it's like a metaphorical death that
Right.
probably frankly does feel truly in the same manner as you would having a relationship like that die in real life. And it's very, very interesting. So, I've thought about, in terms of health and mental health, that there's a lot of applications for this. So if you're in a situation where you've experienced trauma, being able to essentially use AI to generate a simulation for cognitive behavioral therapies and reprogramming your mind might be a way that you can actually really release some of the trauma holding you back in society and allow you to have a functional, a more functional experience in the day to day, right? But then you also have this thing where it basically triggers our monkey mind, right? And we just don't have good boundaries with it, and it's something that we get lost in. So it's one of the most, I guess, confusing innovations that we've ever had, because unlike the steam engine or something like that, there's not a clear application for it that has clear outcomes. It could be good, it could be bad. It's totally dependent on the person. And it also might just be telling you what you want to hear too, leading to bad decisions in real life.
Yeah.
And then there's also, this whole dilution, I guess, of art. You're talking about the music, right? The artistic process, and that something's lost in this whole exercise. I don't remember. I think it was like Harvard or something did a study a couple years ago, and I might have it in the book, but they basically had compared AI to a group of humans and generating, quality ideas for branding and stuff like that. And the human aspect had more of the highs and lows, but the artificial intelligence built a very good normal baseline of ideas. And I think it kind of, fully having this artificial experience, I think takes away some of the beauty of life, where, someone might be creating just absolute shit, but you appreciate them because they're out there creating and iterating and trying to go after it. So, thinking about this whole hierarchy of needs, it's a very interesting discussion, because in many ways you might see this whole experience where you're moving up and down throughout all these levels of the scale over a short period of time, and
Yeah.
really trying to generate some, I guess, mental baseline and foundation in your own mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would just be, I'll use the word elegant again. If we had the technology and we had a commensurate level of consciousness that went along with it, right? Whatever that looked like. It didn't have to be like one brand or one model or one flavor or one color, but it would encompass a really broad level of awareness and being conscious. And if those two things were equal, it would be, I think, ideal, because then we could take these tools and literally we would begin to kind of morph into more fourth dimensional and fifth dimensional beings that we wouldn't have. We're here, we're in this plane. I get it, but I'm not sure we're always going to be here. I mean, people just think it's a given that this story is just going to keep moving forward, and we're going to be here for the next million years. I'm not so sure about that. I have thoughts about that, right? Like if you just look at it astrologically, and we're in Pluto and Aquarius, and a lot of what we're talking about is very Aquarian, and how these Aquarian technologies transform our lives and transform our culture, from having AI friends, which is what Aquarius is, right? It's all about your friends and your groups, and very quickly, it has taken a root in that sort of expression of it. But we're in Pluto and Aquarius for the next 14 years. Then after that, we're in Pluto and Pisces, and that's kind of like the end of the zodiac, right? We've got about 28 years left of this Plutonian evolutionary story. And then we go to Pluto and Aries, and it starts all over again, right? And I question where we're going to be in 25 to 30 years and what this is all going to look like. So as we approach this kind of apex of technology, or the beginning of the apex of this technology, the requisite level of consciousness, I think, needs to be a part of it. And when I look at somebody like Sam Altman or Larry Ellison, and to a lesser extent, Elon Musk, they are not the avatar of this consciousness, right? In fact, they demonstrate some of the worst traits of being a fucking human.
Yeah, totally.
And if there's any meat on the bones, there's a story circulating that Sam Altman knows what happened to one of his programmers, who was going to rat him out about the patented technology that OpenAI had gotten their hands on. So even the creators of the technology aren't approaching this level of consciousness, right? Because a lot of them got there because they cheated the system, right? And they were able to get government money and government loans. It's part of the same old story. They're not bringing, and I don't care how much ketamine Elon Musk does, right? He's not bringing this level of consciousness to the technology. I'm sorry, he's not. And everybody else I've seen associated with, except for yourself, because I work with you on a client basis, I just haven't been impressed with these people. The technology is kind of impressive, but if these are the gods of the technology, then these are really flawed gods. And I'm concerned that what we'll get as a result, and maybe because it is Aquarian and it can kind of invert on itself and do things that are unexpected, like it's not always going to be the most well-trained pet, that it could even surprise them in some ways that they're not really thinking about. But what are your thoughts about that? That the progenitors of this technology in some ways display some of the most despicable traits of being a human.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. And it's, there's the stereotype of the Silicon Valley bro culture, right? Where you just go out, you break all the rules, and you find yourself in a place where you're too big for people to wipe you out.
Yeah.
A good example of that is Uber, Airbnb, companies like that were constantly breaking local laws, but then it became a whole business model and the influence ramped up. So a couple years ago, when the EU was starting to discuss implementing their regulations on AI, you saw this whole jump where all the heads of the AI companies jumped over to Washington, D.C., and then overnight became basically the biggest funders of lobbying there. So it's it's a story that's been told for probably thousands of years, right? Go kiss the hand and make sure that they can let you operate while you do what you do. But it's something that we might see coming up is the Chinese used Claude over I think the last couple of weeks. I was reading about it this morning to generate basically do some like cybersecurity stuff where they were attacking organizations, and Claude was able to stop it. But you see the conversation developing where, well, this is a controlled business and it's not open source. And, that that developing conversation that because we have control over it, it's good. And the open source is going to be bad because we wouldn't have. And it's, I think when you take that approach, you have this situation where you give these people so much power that are there to essentially create something that gobbles everything else up and isn't necessarily there to move society forward in a way.
Right.
And then you have, kind of puppet masters behind the scenes,
right,
driving a collective experience for all of society. So it's, even in the spirituality realm, you have a lot of people that are fully developing a lot of their, I guess, videos and stuff like that, just using AI. And you're kind of like, well, I mean, some of it's pretty interesting, but are we going to get to a place where everything's generic, everything's saying the same thing, and we lose that human aspect of it that really allows us to connect?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I was thinking, what would be a good application for an advanced model of AI? Let's say you want to do converse with it. You go in and you do some machine learning, and you line up the collected works of Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, maybe Erik Erikson, right? And you put them all into maybe Fritz Perls. You put them all into one machine learning program, and you create this super AI that can interpret your dreams, can help you with, archetypes and whatever model any of those people would be conversant in. And I thought, well, that could be a really interesting application because you would have all of this classical knowledge and expertise at your fingertips, and it could help you navigate your life, right? But at the same time, like, there's no Carl Jung unless there's Sigmund Freud.
Mm-hmm.
And Carl Jung is, ultimately winds up being a reaction to Freud and his baseline theories. And so there's the human element that you're talking about, right? Like, if we don't have people that push back on standardized models or whatever the model of the day is. We don't have any like inspiration for evolution. So I think that's one of the things that we can't lose sight of that. We can't just outsource everything to AI, because unless it leads to a breakthrough in your own life and allows you to innovate, and that's a different discussion. But I think for most people, they say, well, I don't need anything else. I've got Joseph Campbell and Fritz Perl and Carl Jung and Eric Erickson, and they're all in there. Why do I need anybody else? And I think that that's kind of the trap that can be set for us, and that we can become very complacent with the models that we create.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this comes from someone that has done that. So I have like a personal development bot essentially.
Right.
And I've programmed it to incorporate Joseph Campbell's framework. So I'm able to basically communicate in that aspect and build narratives around different decisions in my life and how it might relate to that. But at the same time, you have, the whole Brave New World view of Soma. And it's like, are we just building this thing that we take a pill every single day and forget who we are?
Right.
And then one day we hopefully break free and you're living in a kind of a parallel universe, right?
Doug brought up something interesting, and I was actually going to go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he says, mankind does not evolve without crisis. And one of the things that Maslow's hierarchy of needs has built in it is that there's a place where you don't have to experience pain, right? You move beyond sort of everyday pain. And I'm not sure if Maslow got that completely right.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
Like pain is kind of it's an important factor in our lives. Like, I had just recently had this issue with my heart, right? And it's like, there's like a weird process that goes along with it. And one of the things that, I've come to realize is that, life is a moment by moment operation. And there's no guarantee that, we'll wake up the next day and the moment will be there for us. And so in that regard, having the pain or realization that this is a very, temporal experience is actually affecting my life. And I think in a good way, because it's like, I don't want to fucking waste the moments. Right.
Yeah.
So you don't get there unless you have some kind of crisis, which Doug has brought up, and this idea of pain inserting itself into our lives. It causes us to grow. And maybe that's one of the things that AI has a potential of doing, is taking away sort of the rough edges and always reassuring people that everything's going to be okay. I'm not an expert enough in the medium. How do you feel about some of the claims that on the other side of the spectrum, that AI has told people to go commit suicide? Have you heard about this?
Yeah. I think it's obviously very unfortunate, right? And I think probably in a situation, it's just telling people what they want to hear and coaching them towards a specific goal that they have in mind, So the same mechanism that would turn that into a positive communication, where it's like, I want to create this in my life and be it really positive and have it coach you towards that. It's a double-edged sword. And it's it's a very complicated situation in many ways, where we're little children operating in a framework of trauma where you don't really understand what's going on in the world around you.
That's a great point.
Trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And it's totally new, so we don't really have a baseline approach for how to operate it in the situation. To go back to your point, like earlier, it's having those moments where it's just steady Eddie without having, like I think Joseph Campbell referred to it, the belly of the beast, where you're in these moments where you think that you can't get out, and there's that crisis element. I think that not having those moments in your life to build character and develop your personal aspects better really take out a lot of the ability to really appreciate life for what it is. So I think it's very unfortunate. There's so many potential traps, I think, with just the tools and the companies, where you're like, this is just the algorithm, you're the one driving the experience. And then you have situations where they're basically telling people how to kill themselves and to go through with it.
Well, that's the resolution of their pain, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. There's no creative solution to one's pain. It's like, well, why don't you just go end your pain? Like, that's the most logical solution, right? Like,
yeah, totally.
Here you go. Well, I'm going to help you out here. The most logical solution is get rid of it. It means get rid of you. So let's start to bring this train into the station here. You've got 2 young boys who are going to grow up in the age of AI. I'm sure you've given this a lot of thought. How are you going to steward them and be a father and a guide to them, having a ringside seat of this world and being an author who's asking really important questions? Have you given that any thought?
Yes. And then, clearly I don't have a clear answer on it either.
Yeah.
I think it's even what we've experienced with social media and stuff like that. There's a different requirement these days to be more attentive and have I'd say, more empathetic relationship with the people around you, and really have connection with it, because you really don't know what they're being exposed to anymore. I remember when I was a little kid, I could go out, go play basketball at the gym all day and kind of be free range, so to speak. And there wasn't really any big concern about that. But when you have free range kids in the digital universe, there's just like this whole potential scenario of where what sort of experience are they going to be receiving,
Right.
Yeah. And the train has left the station. We don't really have a control over what that's going to be anymore. So I really don't know how to answer it. It's
just evolving. You're going to evolve with it.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when my son was young, and all the kids had video games at their house, and it's like, well, what am I going to do? Well, I introduced video games, but I only introduced video games that I thought were not cruel, so we did a lot of racing games.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Super Mario Kart and stuff like that. So I gave him the experience, and a lot of we played together. So I gave him the experience of video games, but I managed, like, you're not going to have any first person shooter games or anything like that. So I managed his video game experience to the best of that I could. So he got some good stuff out of it, but it wasn't like I was, turning him into a lone wolf sniper. Esperanza Vents has this comment, and it's something that I was kind of hinting at when I talked about, like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and getting to the top and self-actualization and consciousness. And her comment is, I feel like AI is really going to help us understand that consciousness itself takes on many forms. It's training wheels for us to understand interdimensional objects that express consciousness. I think that's a really interesting comment. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's training wheels. I think is a great or a great metaphor for it, because it is this tool that we have now that allows us to explore so many different aspects of life and our experience,
Mhm.
in a way that we've never really had before, and also have a kind of a conversation with this exploration too. So, typically it would be you and me talking, having conversation and learning from each other, but you have this something that's always on that you can communicate with, that I think does really allow you to explore different aspects of society and see where it goes, I guess.
Well, it's still in the infancy stages, and it's going to be interesting to see where it all goes, to say the least. Penny brings up something that is professional here, and I'd love your take on this. We're forced to use AI at my job. It's so locked down that I'm handed literal slop on tasks that would otherwise benefit. It's a very weird IQ test. Do you understand what she's saying there?
Yeah.
What do you how as a leader in the workforce, what would you tell somebody who is leading Penny's team or directing Penny's team with something like that?
Well, I think it really does highlight the fact that you don't have necessarily a strategy around it, and you're not building the battlefield, so to speak. Um, yeah, there's a lot of people think that they're innovative by just allowing people to use Chat GPT at work. That's like their whole innovation strategy, and it just really doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, and like there are a lot of lockdown controls on things, certain things that you can talk to about it, and certain things that you can't. Really, if it's a tool that can't actually access any of your company's information, how is it really going to understand the specialized nature of your business?
So does that reveal an insecurity in leadership? Because she may be able to figure something out and do something with AI that might actually show somebody up that is above her in the food chain. So does that represent an insecurity in leadership?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in many aspects. And I think a lot of people too are worried about data controls and what's going to happen. And from a compliance perspective, you have a lot of these, we're going to do this new tool, but we're still going to operate in the whole old compliance structure that pretty
Right.
much limits any sort of interaction that would be useful.
So the companies that are going to be successful are, number one, define the terrain. That's number one, right? What is the terrain? What are we doing this for? How do we best apply it? And number two, probably take off some of the training wheels and
Yeah.
allow people who are interacting with the technology to do things that might provide a solution outside of the limited controls that they're able to have over the AI. I think those are the companies that are going to be the most successful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's much like raising a child, right? If you're a helicopter parent and the kid never learns how to stand on their own, then, you know, essentially you're going to be limiting them growing up. Like
So
there has to be some sort of ability to be able to interact in an innovative way that's different than you always have been.
right, and those are the companies that are going to win, and they're the ones that are going to that are going to invest in their employees with some level of trust and some level of accountability for them to be able to use these tools, those are the companies that I think are going to do well. The ones that are really hands-on and are using it because they have to use it. Everybody else is using it, but they don't know how to use it. They haven't defined it. They're going to have problems, and they're not only are they not going to evolve, but their products are going to suffer. So Penny is a compliance control tester, and she says you nailed it.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, Matthew, is there anything else that you want to share or bring to the table before we sign off here?
I generally, like, this is going to be something that's going to evolve over the next century, right? And if you've resisted using it out of pride or just beliefs, like, I would just encourage you to test what's out there and learn about it, because whether or not we're personally using it, it's going to end up shaping society and the world that we operate and live in anyways.
It already is. The economy right now is really teetering on these massive investments in AI. Right? That's what's firing the stock market right now. It's an all in or nothing strategy, right? So not only is it going to impact us, it is impacting us. So in some ways, we have an investment in it succeeding, because if it does succeed, it will help us get over the hump economically. But on the other hand, we don't want to encourage success that is alienating and dehumanizing. So we're in a really tricky spot here with this whole thing. I want to just draw people's attention to where you can find Matthew's book if you think this is an interesting topic of conversation, you want to learn more. Leading Beyond Humans, How Executives Thrive in the Age of Intelligent Machines. A little nod there to your Seattle roots. And some really good comments here. Timely and inspiring, 5 stars. Great read, would recommend. Great read and very insightful. How much did you pay these people, Matthew?
Lots of money.
Yeah. Anyway, pretty much 5 stars across the board, and 5 out of 5. So if you enjoyed the conversation and you are in the business world and you want to learn more about this and can bring it to the table, like Penny, I would recommend you get this book, because at the very least, you'll be conversant at a level that, people in management may not have a fucking clue. So I would definitely would check it out. And so if you're in that space and you want to learn more and you want to have a leg up on how this thing applies to the big picture, it's probably a must add to your library. Well, Matthew, thanks for being here and being a part of the show and being a part of the annals of the Friday Farcast.
Yeah, it was fun.
You joined the ranks of Russ Winter and Crimmies and everybody else now. And Dr. Shiva. Nice. You're right in there. All right. I will see you on the private side, Matthew.
All right. Have a great day. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Take good care.
Yeah. You too.
All right. That is Matthew Jensen, author, father, great guy, totally great guy, and a client as well. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed our exploration of artificial intelligence and the challenges in the workforce and beyond. I will endeavor to be back on Sunday night. I've got a busy weekend. I'm going to a wedding, but I'll do my best to be back on Sunday night. And we're going to get into Kash Patel's chart. We're going to get into Kash Patel, and we're going to get into Cash's little squeeze, Alexis Wilkins. Yeah, we're gonna break down the levers chart or the levers charts on Sunday night. So if you have any interest in tawdry astrological gossip, please join me. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for being here. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. don't forget our sponsor, Chris over Trim Science, our guys at Silver Colloidals, the 11th house, Astro Weather is your code over there for 10% off. So they're both great sponsors. All right, we'll see you Sunday night. Bye for now.